Behind the rhinestone cowboy's golden legacy lies a fractured family torn apart by Alzheimer's, million-dollar estate battles, and a son who literally died and came back to life. From a daughter who vanished into obscurity to siblings cut off from a $50 million inheritance, the Campbell children's stories reveal shocking betrayals, near-death miracles, and bitter feuds that continue long after their father's final song. Here's what really happened to Glen Campbell's 8 children. Debbie Campbell. Debbie Campbell became the child who knew Glen Campbell best, but their close relationship began from one of the most painful separations a father and daughter could experience. Born in 1956 as Glen's first surviving child with his wife Diane Kirk, Debbie spent most of her childhood living apart from her famous father, creating a distance that would take decades to bridge. When Glen and Diane divorced in 1959, Debbie was only 3 years old, and she went to live with her mother and stepfather, who was in the military. This meant Debbie's childhood was spent constantly moving from base to base around the world, following her stepfather's assignments, while Glen was building his career as a session musician and eventually a country music superstar. While her father was recording hits like Gentle on My Mind and Wichita Linneman in Los Angeles studios, Debbie was growing up as a military kid, graduating from high school in England and later spending 4 years in Italy when she married an Air Force serviceman. The irony was that even when Debbie would visit Glen during summers in California, she rarely saw him because he was constantly on tour, performing around the world. Instead, she spent those visits primarily with Glen's other children from his second marriage to Billie Jean Nunley, including Kelly, Travis, and Kane. It was during these summers that Debbie realized how little she actually knew about her own father, despite sharing his name and musical genes. The turning point in their relationship came in an unexpected way when Debbie was living in England as a young adult. Glen would travel to Europe for his concert tours, and rather than just passing through, he began making special efforts to connect with his eldest daughter. He would send a car to pick her up from the Air Force base where she lived, and she would spend precious one-on-one time with him in London or travel with him to his other European concert dates. These visits became the foundation of their real relationship, built not in the familiar settings of Los Angeles or Nashville, but in hotel rooms and concert venues across the Atlantic. By 1987, when Debbie was 31 years old, Glen asked her to join his touring show as a singer and duet partner. This marked the beginning of what would become a 24-year professional and personal partnership that lasted until Glen's retirement in 2011 due to Alzheimer's disease. During those years, Debbie was constantly at her father's side, traveling the world and performing with him night after night, finally getting the time with Glen that had been missing from her childhood. Debbie witnessed and supported Glen through his struggles with multiple marriages, substance abuse issues, and eventually, the devastating onset of Alzheimer's disease. She wrote about these experiences in her frank memoir titled Burning Bridges: Life with My Father Glen Campbell, co-authored with Mark Bigot, where she shared the intimate details of supporting her father through his darkest and most vulnerable moments. When Glen was moved to an assisted living facility in 2015, Debbie was among the family members who fought for visitation rights, eventually leading to the passage of Tennessee's Campbell-Falk Act, which protects the rights of family members to visit loved ones with Alzheimer's and other cognitive disorders. Even after Glen's death in 2017, Debbie continued honoring their musical partnership by releasing a tribute album called The Way We Were and hosting the Debbie Campbell Good Time Show on YouTube, keeping her father's variety show legacy alive. Kelly Campbell. Kelly Campbell has achieved something almost impossible in today's world: complete anonymity, despite being the daughter of one of country music's biggest stars. Born in 1961 to Glen Campbell and his second wife, Billie Jean Nunley, Kelly grew up during the height of her father's fame when he was hosting his own television variety show and topping the charts with hits like Rhinestone Cowboy and Southern Nights. Yet she has managed to live her entire adult life completely out of the public eye. Unlike her siblings, who followed various paths in music and entertainment, Kelly made the deliberate choice to step away from any connection to the spotlight that came with being Glen Campbell's daughter. While her half-sister Debbie became Glen's touring partner and her brothers Travis and Wesley remained connected to the family's public battles, Kelly simply vanished from any form of media attention or public documentation after her childhood appearances on the Glen Campbell Good Time Hour in the early 1970s. This disappearance becomes even more remarkable when considering that Kelly was one of the 3 children specifically excluded from Glen's will in 2006, cutting her off from any direct benefit from his $50 million estate. The legal documents filed in Nashville's Davidson Probate Court show that Glen deliberately chose to exclude Kelly, along with her brothers Travis and Wesley, all 3 of whom were his children with Billie Jean Nunley. This exclusion sparked a major family legal battle that made headlines across the country music world. Yet Kelly herself remained completely silent throughout the entire controversy. Even during the highly publicized inheritance dispute that lasted from 2017 until 2018, when her brothers Travis and Wesley challenged their father's will in court, Kelly's name appeared only in legal documents and news reports about the case. She never made any public statements, never gave interviews, and never appeared in court proceedings, maintaining her pattern of complete privacy even when millions of dollars were at stake. The contrast between Kelly and her siblings is striking and deliberate. While her half-sister Ashley built a successful music career, performing at venues like Carnegie Hall and the Royal Albert Hall, and her brothers Cal and Shannon continued performing music locally, Kelly chose a path that kept her entirely separate from the entertainment industry. Public records show virtually nothing about her adult life, career choices, or even her current location, suggesting an intentional effort to maintain distance from her father's legacy and the ongoing family drama. What makes Kelly's privacy even more unusual is that she lived through some of the most documented periods of Glen Campbell's life, including his television show years, when cameras regularly captured the Campbell family at home, his struggles with addiction and multiple divorces, and later, his battle with Alzheimer's disease that was featured in an Academy Award-nominated documentary. Through all of these highly publicized family moments, Kelly managed to remain essentially invisible. The most recent public mention of Kelly came in 2018, when her brothers ended their legal challenge to their father's will without explanation, officially closing the inheritance dispute. Even then, no statements were released on her behalf, and she maintained the same level of privacy that has defined her adult life, successfully avoiding the attention that typically comes with being part of a famous family involved in a high-profile legal battle. William Travis Campbell. William Travis Campbell experienced what can only be described as a medical miracle when he literally died and came back to life in June of 2014, an event that he believes changed not just his own destiny, but also led to important legal protections for families dealing with Alzheimer's disease. Born to Glen Campbell and his second wife Billie Jean Nunley, Travis had been dealing with the stress of his father's declining health and the family conflicts surrounding Glen's care when his own life took a dramatic and nearly fatal turn. On a day in late June 2014, Travis suffered a massive heart attack and stroke that left him clinically dead in the ambulance, while paramedics frantically worked to keep him alive. His wife, Trudy, refused to let the emergency responders give up, even though they could not maintain his heartbeat, and he had passed the critical 20-minute mark without oxygen to his brain by the time he reached the emergency room at Wesley Medical Center. The medical team continued performing chest compressions and shocking his heart all the way into the operating room, but Travis showed no signs of life. After emergency surgery, doctors placed Travis in a medically induced hypothermic state, essentially putting him on ice for 48 hours while he remained in a coma. When they began the dangerous process of warming his body back to normal temperature another 48 hours later, brain scans showed no activity. And doctors told Trudy that there was nothing more they could do. They left the decision in her hands about whether to turn off the machines that were keeping his heart beating. Instead of giving up, Trudy placed a picture of Travis's deceased mother, Billie Jean, next to his bed, along with a photograph of Billie Jean standing with Mother Teresa. She also called in a minister named Tony Klein, who brought a prayer cloth that had been blessed and anointed. On June 24, 2014, exactly 34 years after Trudy's own father had been killed in a wheat truck accident, she decided to record what she believed would be Travis's final moments as the minister prayed over him. What happened next defied all medical explanation and changed Travis's understanding of his purpose in life. As the prayer cloth was placed on his arm and the minister began praying, Travis's hand suddenly began to shake, and doctors witnessed what they could only describe as him coming back from the dead. When Travis finally regained consciousness, he was screaming the words, "She won't let me stay. Mom won't let me stay," referring to his mother, Billie Jean Campbell, who had passed away in 1992. Travis believes that his mother appeared to him during his near-death experience and told him he could not stay because he had important work to do on Earth, specifically fighting for the rights of parents and children to visit each other when conservators or guardians tried to prevent family contact. The stress from being denied regular access to his father, Glen, who was suffering from Alzheimer's disease, had contributed to Travis's health crisis, and he became convinced that his miraculous recovery was meant to help other families facing similar situations. Working with the Catherine Falk organization, Travis successfully lobbied for the passage of Tennessee's Campbell-Falk Act, which ensures that family members have equal rights to visit loved ones with Alzheimer's disease or other cognitive disabilities. Preventing conservators from arbitrarily denying access to parents, children, or other close relatives unless a court specifically rules that such visits would be harmful. Wesley Kane Campbell. Wesley Kane Campbell represents one of the most puzzling stories among Glen Campbell's children, having grown from a baby who charmed television audiences in the early 1970s into an adult who has managed to remain almost completely invisible to the public eye. Born on February 12, 1969, to Glen Campbell and his second wife, Billie Jean Nunley, Wesley appeared as a tiny infant on the Glen Campbell Good Time Hour during its run from 1969 to 1972, giving millions of viewers a glimpse of Glen's growing family during the peak of his television and recording career. Those early television appearances showed Wesley as part of what seemed like the perfect American family, with Glen frequently featuring his children on the variety show that made him a household name across the country. Viewers watched Wesley grow from a baby into a toddler on national television. But unlike many children who grow up in the entertainment industry, Wesley completely disappeared from public view as he reached adulthood, choosing a path of privacy that has lasted for decades. What makes Wesley's story particularly complex is that despite maintaining this low profile throughout his adult life, he became unwillingly thrust into the spotlight when Glen's will was revealed after the country star's death in 2017. Legal documents filed in Nashville's Davidson Probate Court showed that Wesley, along with his siblings Kelly and Travis, had been specifically excluded from Glen's $50 million estate in a will dated September 1, 2006. This exclusion meant that Wesley would receive no direct benefit from his father's fortune, despite being one of Glen's 8 children. The inheritance battle that followed Glen's death brought Wesley's name into court records and news reports, but remarkably, he managed to remain personally absent from all public aspects of the legal proceedings. While his brother Travis spoke to media outlets and fought publicly for visitation rights and inheritance claims, Wesley maintained the same silence that had characterized his adult life, never giving interviews or making public statements about the family disputes that were making headlines across the entertainment industry. Court documents reveal that Wesley joined his siblings Kelly and Travis in initially challenging their father's will, with legal proceedings that stretched from 2017 into 2018 and involved questions about Glen's mental capacity when he signed the documents that excluded them. The case centered around whether Glen Campbell was mentally competent to make these decisions, given his Alzheimer's diagnosis, and whether the exclusions were valid under Tennessee law. In November 2018, Wesley and his siblings suddenly ended their legal challenge without explanation, effectively accepting their exclusion from Glen's estate and allowing their stepmother, Kim Campbell, to proceed as the sole executor. Even this resolution happened without any public statements from Wesley, maintaining his pattern of avoiding media attention despite being involved in one of country music's most publicized inheritance disputes. The contrast between Wesley's early visibility as a baby on his father's television show and his complete adult privacy creates one of the most mysterious legacies among Glen Campbell's children, leaving virtually no public record of his career, personal life, or current circumstances, despite being at the center of a $50 million legal battle that captivated the entertainment world. Glen Campbell. Glen Campbell entered the world under circumstances that would define his relationship with both family and fame. Being born in 1980, just 3 weeks before his parents, Glen Campbell and Sarah Barg, finalized their divorce, making him the child of a broken marriage before he even took his first breath. As the only son from Glen's third marriage, Glen was raised primarily by his famous father after the divorce, growing up in the shadow of one of country music's biggest stars, while his mother Sarah retreated from public life entirely. Unlike what many might expect from the son of the rhinestone cowboy, Glen deliberately chose to forge his own artistic identity that stands in sharp contrast to his father's polished country pop sound. Rather than following Glen's footsteps into traditional country music, Glen developed a brooding alternative style that draws inspiration from artists like David Bowie, Interpol, and Paul Simon, creating music that emphasizes emotional depth, complex lyricism, and darker melodies that reflect a completely different artistic sensibility than his father's upbeat, mainstream appeal. This musical rebellion wasn't born from rejection of his father's legacy, but rather from Glen's understanding that authentic artistic expression requires finding one's own voice rather than simply inheriting one. His songs explore themes of trauma, personal struggle, and emotional healing, with his official website stating that the best art and creative expression stems from trauma, suggesting that Glen's music comes from a place of genuine personal experience rather than manufactured emotion. Based in Nashville, Glen has built a career as a singer-songwriter within the indie and alternative music scenes, performing songs with titles like Letter from a Son, High Rent Hotel, and The Fall that showcase his introspective approach to songwriting. His music carries a message that, no matter how dark it gets, there is a light at the end of the tunnel which never goes out, reflecting both his personal philosophy and the emotional journey that influences his creative work. The timing of Glen's birth during his parents' divorce meant that he grew up witnessing the complexities of his father's personal life, including Glen's highly publicized relationship with country star Tanya Tucker that began shortly after the divorce from Sarah. This early exposure to the turbulent side of fame and celebrity relationships likely influenced Glen's decision to pursue a more underground approach to his own musical career, avoiding the mainstream country music industry that brought both success and personal complications to his father's life. Throughout Glen's battle with Alzheimer's disease and the family conflicts that surrounded his care and eventual death in 2017, Glen maintained his characteristic distance from public family drama, focusing instead on his music and artistic development. Unlike his half-siblings who became involved in inheritance disputes and public statements about their father's legacy, Glen has continued to let his music speak for itself, building a career based on artistic merit rather than family connections. His approach to being Glen Campbell's son reflects a mature understanding that true artistic success comes from developing one's own creative voice, rather than trading on family name recognition, even when that name carries significant weight in the music industry. Cal Campbell. Cal Campbell discovered his father's greatest gift, living within himself during the most heartbreaking period of their relationship, when Alzheimer's disease had stolen Glen Campbell's ability to have normal conversations, but somehow left the music intact. Born in 1983 as Glen's first son with his fourth wife Kim Woolen, Cal grew up surrounded by music and naturally gravitated toward the drums, becoming an accomplished musician who joined his father's touring band in 2010 when he was 27 years old. The timing of Cal joining Glen's band coincided with one of the most difficult periods in the Campbell family's life, as Glen had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in 2011 and was preparing for what would become his final farewell tour. Cal found himself in the unique position of being both Glen's son and his professional drummer during a time when the legendary musician was struggling with the early stages of a disease that would eventually take away his memory, his personality, and his ability to recognize his own children. As Glen's condition progressed, Cal experienced the devastating reality that doctors had warned the family about when Alzheimer's patients gradually lose their ability to maintain relationships with loved ones. The father-son conversations that had been part of Cal's life since childhood became increasingly difficult and eventually impossible. As Glen could no longer remember details about Cal's life, their shared experiences, or even recognize him as his son during the disease's later stages. During this emotionally crushing period, Cal turned to music as his primary way of coping with the loss of his father's presence, even while Glen was still alive. He wrote movingly about this experience on the family's caregiving blog, explaining how he picked up his guitar one afternoon, hoping to forget the pain of having a father with Alzheimer's for just a few minutes. When he strummed a chord and opened his mouth to sing, Cal discovered something extraordinary that changed his understanding of his connection to Glen. Cal described finding what he called the gift within himself, realizing that his father's musical abilities had been passed down to him in ways he had never fully recognized before. This discovery became a source of comfort and connection during a time when traditional communication with Glen was no longer possible, allowing Cal to feel close to his father through the shared language of music, even when words and memories had been taken away by the disease. The experience of playing music while grieving his father's gradual disappearance helped Cal understand that Glen's legacy lived on not just in recordings and memories, but in the genetic and emotional inheritance that had been passed to his children. Cal found that music became his way of accessing the parts of Glen that Alzheimer's couldn't destroy, creating a bridge between father and son that transcended the limitations imposed by the disease. Cal continues to perform music both as a solo artist and in collaboration with his siblings, maintaining his own band while also supporting his sister Ashley's solo career. His understanding of music as both a coping mechanism and a family inheritance has shaped his approach to honoring Glen's memory while building his own artistic identity. Shannon Campbell. Shannon Campbell has chosen one of the most selfless paths possible for someone born with extraordinary musical talent, dedicating his career to supporting his sister Ashley's rise as a solo artist, rather than pursuing the individual stardom that his inherited abilities could easily have brought him. Born in 1985 as the middle child of Glen Campbell and Kim Woolen, Shannon grew up surrounded by music and quickly demonstrated that he had inherited his father's remarkable guitar skills and natural performing abilities. Like his siblings Cal and Ashley, Shannon joined Glen's touring band in 2010 when their father was preparing for what would become his final years of performing before Alzheimer's disease forced his retirement. During those crucial years from 2010 to 2012, Shannon served as one of Glen's guitarists during the farewell tour that was documented in the Academy Award-nominated film Glen Campbell, I'll Be Me. giving him experience performing on some of the world's biggest stages, alongside one of country music's greatest artists. When Glen retired from touring in 2012 due to his worsening Alzheimer's symptoms, Shannon faced a decision that would define his musical career moving forward. Despite having proven himself as a skilled guitarist, capable of holding his own alongside seasoned professional musicians, and despite having the Campbell name recognition that could have opened doors to solo recording contracts and headline performances, Shannon chose to focus his talents on supporting Ashley's emerging solo career instead of building his own individual brand. This decision has meant that Shannon spends his time as Ashley's primary musical collaborator, playing guitar and providing vocals for her performances and recordings, while remaining largely in the background of her growing success. He co-wrote the song "Looks Like Time" with Ashley for her debut album, The Lonely One, demonstrating his songwriting abilities while ensuring that Ashley remained the primary creative force and public face of their musical partnership. Shannon's choice to remain in a supporting role becomes even more remarkable when considering Ashley's rapid rise in the music industry, including performances at prestigious venues like Carnegie Hall, the Royal Albert Hall in London, and the main stage at London's O2 Arena as part of the Country to Country Festival. Rather than using these high-profile opportunities to launch his own solo career, Shannon has consistently chosen to be Ashley's backing musician, allowing her to shine, while he provides the musical foundation that helps make her performances successful. Beyond his work with Ashley, Shannon maintains his own musical projects, including a band that performs locally in Los Angeles and Phoenix, showing that he has the ability and drive to pursue independent musical ventures when he chooses to do so. His decision to prioritize Ashley's career over his own solo ambitions reflects a level of family loyalty and artistic generosity that is rare in the competitive music industry, where sibling rivalry and individual ambition often override family support. Shannon continues to perform alongside Ashley as she builds her career as a solo artist, touring internationally and recording albums, while he provides the musical expertise and sibling support that helps make her success possible, demonstrating that sometimes the greatest musical gift is knowing when to step back and let someone else take center stage. Ashley Campbell. Ashley Campbell took the most unexpected path to musical stardom, discovering her true calling only after pursuing completely different artistic dreams that had nothing to do with her father's country music legacy. Born in 1986 as Glen Campbell's youngest daughter with his fourth wife, Kim Woolen, Ashley initially showed no interest in following her father's musical footsteps, instead setting her sights on acting and comedy performance in Los Angeles. After graduating from college, Ashley pursued her passion for performance by joining the prestigious Groundlings comedy troupe in Los Angeles, the same legendary improv and sketch comedy group that launched the careers of major stars like Will Ferrell, Kristen Wiig, and Lisa Kudrow. This path seemed to indicate that Ashley would build her career in comedy and acting rather than music. Despite growing up in a household where Glen Campbell was constantly writing, recording, and performing some of country music's most beloved songs, the moment that changed Ashley's entire life direction came when she was cast in a theatrical production that required her character to play the banjo, an instrument she had never touched before. Rather than turning down the role or finding a way around the musical requirement, Ashley decided to learn the banjo specifically for this acting job, not realizing that this decision would unlock a musical gift that had been dormant throughout her childhood and young adult years. As Ashley began learning the banjo, she discovered that she had inherited her father's natural musical abilities in ways that surprised everyone, including herself. The instrument seemed to come naturally to her, and she found herself drawn not just to playing the banjo, but to the broader world of country and folk music that the instrument represented. By 2008, Ashley had become proficient enough on the banjo that she started performing with her father during his concerts. And by 2009, she had joined Glen's touring band as a full-time member. The timing of Ashley's musical awakening proved to be both a blessing and a heartbreak. As Glen was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in 2011, making Ashley's 3 years on the road with him during his farewell tour from 2010 to 2012, a precious final chapter in their father-daughter relationship. During this period, Ashley became not just Glen's banjo player, but also his emotional support, helping him navigate the early stages of Alzheimer's while documenting their experiences together. Ashley's role in the 2014 documentary Glen Campbell, I'll Be Me, made her the breakout star of the film, particularly through her performance of Remembering, a deeply personal song she wrote about watching her father struggle with Alzheimer's disease. The documentary won a Grammy Award and received an Academy Award nomination, launching Ashley's solo career and establishing her as an artist in her own right rather than simply Glen Campbell's daughter. Since then, Ashley has built an impressive international career that has taken her from intimate venues to some of the world's most prestigious stages, including performances at Carnegie Hall with legendary songwriter Jimmy Webb, the main stage at London's O2 Arena, and a sold-out show at the Royal Albert Hall as part of Scott Bradley's postmodern jukebox ensemble.